The morning I found out I was banned from my own daughter's wedding, my hands were covered in flour and my phone screen was lighting up with notifications. At 68 years old, Joanne Bradley isn't easily rattled. I've spent over 3 decades waking up at 4 a.m. to knead dough bake and run my own home-style bakery. With that very same sweat and elbow grease, I paid for my kids' tuition, kept the lights on, and kept a roof over our heads. But to my daughter Sloane, making a living with my hands made me far too embarrassing to sit next to the VIPs at her reception. I didn't even find out I was cut from the guest list through a phone call or a visit. I saw it on social media. Photos of the rehearsal dinner were plastered everywhere. The parents of her fiancé Trent were smiling and clinking crystal champagne flutes, while a sign covered in gold calligraphy welcomed all our family. All the family, that is, except me. When I called her out on it, Sloane didn't sound surprised, and she certainly didn't sound sorry. With an ice-cold tone, she explained that Trent wanted an exclusive vibe, and that my plainclothes, rough hands, and habit of speaking my mind would make his investors uncomfortable. I asked her if she remembered exactly who had bailed her out of $15,000 in credit card debt just 6 months ago. She went dead silent for a second before warning me not to ruin her special moment by bringing up money, calling it tacky and low class. I took a deep breath, wiped the dough off my fingers, and told her I'd respect her wishes. I wouldn't be there. I stayed home the day of the wedding. By that evening, cell phone video of the reception was already making the rounds on the local news, and the clip of Trent slapping her across the face had gone completely viral. I watched the screen in silence, taking a sip of black coffee. I knew exactly what had sparked that slap, and it had all started 3 days earlier. 3 days before the ceremony, Sloane and Trent showed up in my kitchen. I was prepping the week's orders, the air heavy with the smell of yeast and vanilla. Sloane walked in glued to her phone, dressed to the nines, while Trent trailed behind her with that stiff, rehearsed posture of his that always rubbed me the wrong way. They claimed they were there to borrow some vintage tablecloths, but the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. That's when Sloane gave me the speech about the wedding's aesthetic. She told me that Trent's colleagues were high rollers people who valued optics above all else. I was standing there in my white apron and work boots. I looked at my daughter, the same little girl I'd taught to walk on these very linoleum tiles. "So my presence threatens your aesthetic," I said, keeping my voice dead even. Trent chimed in with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He rattled on about networking and how my line of work might be a little hard for his partners to relate to. Sloane nodded, chiming in that I was always too critical of people who lived outside their means. In my apron pocket, I had an envelope stuffed with $3,500 in cash. It was my wedding gift to them, meant to cover the photographer's final balance, a bill Sloane had been dropping heavy hints they couldn't afford. Hearing their little speech, my fingers brushed the edge of the paper. Slowly, I pulled my empty hand out of my pocket and rested it on the flour-dusted table. "I hear you loud and clear," I said, looking right at them. "You want a flawless day. You have my word, I won't show up to embarrass you, and I won't show up to bail you out when things go south." Sloane scoffed, clearly irritated by my tone, and spun on her heel toward the door. Trent followed, practically sighing with relief. They walked out of my house, totally convinced they'd won, that they'd protected their fragile little image. What they didn't know was that the envelope sitting safely in my pocket was just the very first thing they were about to lose. The next morning, my son Nolan swung by the bakery. Unlike his sister, Nolan actually respected hard work. He was a financial manager and had a hawk's eye for details. Over coffee, I filled him in on what happened. Sloane's behavior didn't shock him, but something about Trent's investors made him frown. Nolan reminded me about the joint bank account I'd opened with Sloane years ago. It was a rainy day fund strictly for medical emergencies or sudden repairs, and she had direct access to it. With a sinking feeling in my gut, I booted up the computer in the back office and pulled up the statement. What I saw on that screen made my blood run cold. The balance was virtually zero. Over the last 3 months, massive chunks of money had been wired to a corporate account in Trent's name, along with direct payments to the swanky country club hosting the wedding. They had drained my safety net to bankroll their luxury charade. I didn't feel like crying. I just felt a cold, crystal-clear focus. I didn't waste a second. I grabbed my purse and my ID and marched 3 blocks down to my bank. I sat across from the branch manager, a guy I'd known for 20 years, and gave him crystal-clear instructions. I withdrew the remaining couple $100, permanently closed the joint account, and canceled every authorized user card linked to my name. Then I opened a brand new solo account. The manager asked if everything was all right. I told him without missing a beat that I was just doing some financial spring cleaning. I walked out, holding my receipts, feeling like I'd just taken my power back. I had secured what was mine. But when I got back to the bakery, Nolan was waiting for me, his face pale. He dug up something much, much worse about Sloane's picture-perfect fiancé. Nolan had been doing a little digging into Trent on his own. He flipped open his laptop and showed me a batch of photos an event photographer buddy of his had snapped a few weeks prior. There was Trent cozying up to a woman at a downtown hotel bar, and it definitely wasn't Sloane. In one shot, he was kissing her neck. In another, they were slipping into an elevator together at 2 a.m. But the pictures weren't even the worst of it. Through mutual connections, Nolan had gotten his hands on screenshots of text messages where Trent was trashing our family. In one text, Trent bragged to his side piece that he just needed to get through the wedding to tap into his Baker mother-in-law's bottomless wallet and the prime plot of land I owned out by the county line. He literally called it dumb money. I didn't hesitate. I didn't drive over to Sloane's condo to scream or beg her to believe me. I just pulled out my phone, attached the photos and screenshots, and texted them directly to her. I only typed one sentence. Look at these before you sign a marriage license. The choice is yours. Her reply came 10 minutes later, a furious voice memo. She accused me of being bitter, of trying to sabotage her happiness because I was jealous she was marrying into money. She claimed the photos were totally out of context and that Nolan had photoshopped the texts because he was a jealous loser. You're pathetic. Stay the hell away from us, she spat at the end. A second later, her profile picture vanished. She'd blocked me. I clicked the screen dark and tossed my phone into my desk drawer. Nolan looked at me, waiting to see if I'd crack. I gave her the truth, I said, organizing a stack of invoices. She chose the fantasy. Now it's time for me to lock down my reality. And my next move required a locksmith. Out near the county line, I owned a second piece of property, a sturdy little ranch house my late husband and I had bought years ago. Sloane and Trent just assumed they'd be moving in there after the honeymoon, paying a token $500 a month in rent that I knew they'd never actually cough up. Sloane already had a key and had been moving boxes of her stuff over there for weeks. That afternoon, I drove out to the property with a locksmith in tow. I stood on the porch in silence, watching the guy drill out the old deadbolts and install heavy-duty locks on every single door. When he handed me the heavy new ring of keys, I dropped them in my purse. They felt like an anchor keeping me grounded. While he was finishing up, I stepped inside. Sitting right in the hallway were 4 big boxes packed with Sloane's designer shoes and overpriced knickknacks. One by one, I picked them up, hauled them out to the back patio, threw a heavy waterproof tarp over them to protect them from the elements, and padlocked the back gate. I didn't break anything. I didn't toss her stuff in the gutter. I simply relocated her belongings out of my personal space. Back at my own house, I sat at the kitchen table and combed through my insurance policies and property deeds, making absolutely sure my name, and only my name, was on the dotted lines. I had spent my whole life being my daughter's silent safety net, eating the cost of her bad decisions and making excuses for her snobbery. But the era of subsidizing her arrogance with my sweat and tears was officially over. Wedding day rolled around sunny and bright. While the guests were busy squeezing into silk suits at the country club, I tied on a fresh apron and started prepping dough for the next morning's rush. I was totally at peace, just waiting for their house of cards to collapse. By the night of the wedding, the only sound in my kitchen was the quiet hum of the refrigerator. At exactly 8:30, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Nolan with a video file attached. I hit play, and the whole disaster unfolded right there on my screen. The video, clearly recorded by a guest near the dance floor, showed Sloane and Trent standing under a massive crystal chandelier. The band had completely stopped playing. Sloane had a microphone in one hand and Trent's smartphone in the other. Her extravagant white gown looked ridiculous against the dead silence of the ballroom. Her voice was shaking, echoing through the PA system as she read a text message she had just intercepted on his phone. It was from the other woman. Trent lunged to grab the phone back, but Sloane stepped away, screaming into the mic, demanding to know why her credit cards, the ones tied to my name, had been declined when she tried to pay the venue's final catering bill an hour ago. Right there in front of dozens of executives and investors, Sloane aired all his dirty laundry. Trent was completely broke. His startup was underwater, and the entire lavish wedding was a smoke and mirrors act, funded behind my back. The humiliation on Trent's face was instant. His slick, sophisticated mask totally disintegrated. When Sloane yelled into the mic that he was a con artist, he snapped. He stepped right up to her, and in front of 100 smartphones rolling video, he slapped her hard across the face. The smack echoed through the whole room. There was a split second of dead silence before absolute chaos erupted. Security rushed the floor. I locked my phone screen and rubbed my tired eyes. Sloane had gotten her wake-up call in the ugliest way possible, and I knew my phone would be ringing any minute. Just past 10 o'clock, my screen lit up with an unknown number. I picked it up on the second ring. It was Sloane. Her voice was ragged, choked with hyperventilating sobs. She was calling from a bridesmaid's phone. "Mom!" She whimpered, acting like the vicious insults she'd hurled at me 3 days ago never happened. "You have to come down here." Trent took off. "The venue manager won't let me get my bags out of the bridal suite until the final bill is settled. None of my cards are working. The bank says the account is closed. You have to wire them the money, please. There are reporters outside." I listened to her panic. A year ago, I would have sprinted to my car and emptied my pockets to shield her from the embarrassment. But tonight, my voice was steady and flat. "Are you physically safe?" I asked. "Yes, hotel security pulled me into the back office. But Mom, the money. I'm sending a reliable cab paid up front to pick you up at the loading dock and bring you here," I interrupted. "But I am not paying a single red cent for an event I was banned from, especially after you two raided my savings behind my back." "You can't leave me stranded like this," she shrieked, the old entitlement flaring right back up. "This is the worst day of my life. And I am truly sorry for that, Sloane. The cab will be there in 20 minutes. That is the only help I am offering you tonight." I hung up before she could argue. I ordered the ride and sat in the living room to wait. She'd be arriving in the dead of night, but she was in for one last surprise when she got here. It was pushing 2 a.m. when I heard the tires crunch on the driveway. Sloane stepped out of the cab in dead silence, hiking up the ruined skirt of her wedding dress. Her makeup was streaked, and there was an ugly red welt rising on her left cheek. I watched her from the living room window. Instead of coming to my front door, she made a beeline for the side path leading to the ranch house out back, the place she thought belonged to her. I watched as she dug out her key, jammed it into the deadbolt, and pushed. The door didn't budge. She tried it 3 more times, rattling the doorknob in a furious panic before finally giving up and trudging toward my front porch. I opened the door before she even knocked. She glared at me, a mix of pure exhaustion and rage. "You changed the locks," she muttered, crossing her arms. "I did." "I closed the bank account too," I replied, stepping aside so she could come in. "Your old bedroom is made up. You can sleep in there." She collapsed onto the living room sofa, staring at me like I was the villain in her story. "You let me get humiliated at the hotel, and now you're leaving me homeless." "You're getting your wires crossed, Sloan," I said, locking eyes with her. "You and Trent stole from me. I shut off the tap. Your fiancé's lies humiliated you, not me. You are perfectly safe in this house, but my days as your ATM are permanently over." Sloan dropped her head into her hands and started to cry. She wasn't crying over the slap. She was crying because she'd just lost all her control. I didn't try to hug her or offer empty platitudes. I just pointed down the hall toward her room. The real showdown, however, was coming the next morning. At 9 a.m. sharp, someone started pounding on the front door so hard the glass panes rattled. Nolan, who had come over early to keep an eye on things, jumped up instantly. I held up a hand, telling him to hang back, and walked over, opening the door just a few inches. Trent was standing on the porch. He was still wearing his rumpled tuxedo shirt from last night, and he looked downright feral. That slick, corporate hotshot persona was totally gone. "I need to talk to Sloan," he demanded, trying to shoulder his way in. "And I need the keys to the guest house. My bags are in the car." "You're not setting foot in my house," I said, blocking the doorway with my body. "And the house out back is locked up tight. New deadbolts." Trent let out a nasty, bitter laugh. "You can't do that. We're legally family now. Sloan and I have rights to that house. It's ours." "No, it's really not," Nolan said, stepping into view behind me with his arms crossed. "The deed is in my mother's name. And the funds you embezzled from her account have already been flagged with the bank's fraud department." Trent went completely pale. He knew that without that stolen cash, he didn't have a leg to stand on. "You're a bunch of white trash nobodies," Trent spat, totally losing his cool. "Low-class losers. You ruined me. You ruined yourself the second you decided to live out of someone else's pocket," I said, without flinching. "Now get off my property before I call the cops and have you trespassed." I slammed the door in his face. I listened to his heavy footsteps retreat down the gravel drive, followed by the aggressive roar of his engine as he sped off. The trash had taken itself out, but I still had to square things with my daughter. It's been 8 months since that morning. Sloan never did move into the house out back. Once she realized my boundaries were written in stone, she packed up her stuff and rented a cramped little apartment across town. She's working retail now, bagging clothes at a boutique and throwing half her paycheck at the debts Trent racked up in her name before skipping town. The annulment went through fast, considering there were 0 actual assets to split. Yesterday afternoon, Sloan walked into the bakery. She was wearing plain jeans and a simple sweater. She walked up to the register, waited patiently while I rang out a customer and slid a plain white envelope across the counter. It was her 4th monthly installment, the money she was slowly paying back. "Thanks, Mom," she said, actually making eye contact. "Thank you, Sloan," I replied, dropping the envelope into the drop safe. There were no dramatic hugs or tearful apologies. Our relationship is still pretty distant, but for the first time in her adult life, there's a foundation of mutual respect. She finally learned that a mother's love doesn't mean being a blank check, and I learned that protecting my peace is way more important than keeping up appearances. I ended up renting the back house out to a nice young couple who pay their rent on time on the 1st of every month. And with the money I saved from shutting off Sloan's gravy train, I started a little apprenticeship program at the bakery, teaching the trade to women who need a fresh start. Sometimes the best way to fight back isn't by destroying the people who walked all over you. It's simply revoking their access to your life, your hard work, and your peace of mind. My dignity was never for sale, and my flour-dusted hands have never felt as valuable as they do today. Everything is exactly where it needs to be. Looking back, I always bought into the myth that being a mother meant being a human shield, absorbing my kids' mistakes no matter how heavy the burden got. But this whole ordeal taught me something profound. Unconditional love should never ever be confused with unconditional access to my life or my wallet. Setting boundaries wasn't about revenge or being cold-hearted. It was a basic act of self-respect. I finally realized that my mental health, my dignity, and the calluses on my hands aren't bargaining chips to bankroll someone else's charade. In the end, letting go of the guilt and forcing other people to carry the actual weight of their own choices was the only way I got my life back.